There is a word that economists reach for reluctantly, a word that central bankers avoid in public, a word that politicians of every party treat as unspeakable because no government has ever successfully navigated what it describes. The word is stagflation. Stagnant growth, persistent inflation, simultaneously. The combination that breaks the conventional toolkit of economic management, because every tool available to address one makes the other worse. This week's UK economic data showed both. I'm Victor Smith. This is the verdict. Before we get to the data, let me explain why stagflation is different from the economic conditions most people are accustomed to thinking about. In a normal recession, growth slows or contracts, unemployment rises, and inflation typically falls because demand collapses. The central bank cuts interest rates, government spending increases, the economy recovers. The tools work because the problem is one-dimensional. In a normal inflationary period, growth is strong, demand is high, prices rise, and the central bank raises interest rates to cool demand. Uncomfortable for borrowers, but manageable with discipline. Stagflation combines the worst of both conditions. Growth is stagnant or contracting, so cutting interest rates seems necessary to stimulate the economy. Inflation is persistent, so raising interest rates seems necessary to control prices. The two requirements are directly contradictory. Every policy response makes one problem worse while addressing the other. The Bank of England is currently sitting on its hands, not because it lacks competence, but because its toolkit does not contain a tool designed for this specific combination. How we got here. The honest account. The immediate cause is visible and well understood. The Iran war's disruption of Strait of Hormuz energy flows has pushed oil and gas prices to levels that feed directly into every cost in the British economy. Transport, manufacturing inputs, home heating, food production. The energy price shock of 2022, which the UK economy absorbed with considerable pain, is being replicated and compounded. But I want to make a broader argument that the energy shock is revealing a structural weakness, rather than creating one. The UK economy entered this period of external shock with three pre-existing vulnerabilities that made it more exposed than comparable economies. First, energy dependency. Despite North Sea production, the UK remains a net energy importer with insufficient domestic generation capacity and renewables to buffer against fossil fuel price volatility. The energy security agenda that was urgent in 2022 was pursued with insufficient speed and scale. The Iranian disruption is finding the same gap that the Russian disruption found 3 years ago. We did not fix it. Second, productivity stagnation. UK productivity growth has been essentially flat since the 2008 financial crisis. An economy that isn't getting more productive has no buffer against cost shocks. Every increase in input costs flows directly to prices or to margins. And right now, it's flowing to prices. Third, the Brexit adjustment. I am not making a binary argument about Brexit's merits. I am making a specific observation about timing. The UK is managing trade friction costs, labor market adjustments, and regulatory divergence expenses at exactly the moment when it can least afford additional economic headwinds. The cumulative drag of those adjustments, conservatively estimated by the OBR at several percentage points of GDP over the adjustment period, is coinciding with the external shocks in a way that compounds rather than averages out. What this means for British households. Let me translate the macroeconomics into kitchen table terms, because that is where this story actually lives. Mortgage costs remain elevated. The Bank of England cannot cut rates aggressively because inflation hasn't been defeated. The relief that homeowners on variable rates and those remortgaging were hoping for is delayed indefinitely. Food prices are rising again after a brief stabilization. Energy prices are rising again. The cost of living crisis that the government declared over is not over. It paused. It has returned. Real wages adjusted for inflation, are under pressure again for workers in the lower half of the income distribution. The households that spent 2022 and 2023 in genuine financial distress are being asked to absorb a second wave before they have recovered from the first. Public services, already stretched by a decade of constrained funding and then the pandemic, face a choice between inflation-matching pay increases that blow the fiscal budget and below-inflation settlements that drive further strikes and service degradation. The Chancellor is navigating a fiscal position that has no comfortable options. borrow more, and the bond markets that fund the borrowing demand higher yields, which feeds back into mortgage costs and government debt service. Tax more, and you reduce the consumer spending that is already the economy's only source of meaningful growth. Cut spending, and you withdraw the public investment that productivity growth requires. There is no good option. There are only options with different distribution of pain. The political consequence. Stagflation is politically toxic in a specific way that normal recession or normal inflation is not. In a recession, the government can credibly argue the global economy is contracting and Britain is not immune. In an inflationary period, the government can credibly argue it is managing an inherited problem. Stagflation combines both conditions and removes both excuses simultaneously. Growth is stagnant, so the government cannot point to economic dynamism. Prices are rising, so the government cannot claim inflation is under control. And the toolkit available to address either condition makes the other worse, so the government cannot even credibly promise effective action. The political history of stagflation in Britain is not encouraging. The 1970s stagflation destroyed the Callaghan government and ushered in 18 years of conservative rule. The conditions are structurally different. We are not in the 1970s, and the labor market dynamics are not the same. But the political dynamic, a government unable to offer credible solutions to a problem that directly affects household finances, is familiar. The upside. The UK entered this period with a stronger labor market than most comparable economies. Unemployment remains low. That is a genuine buffer. Households with earners have income even if its real value is being eroded. A labor market that holds means the recession component of stagflation is less severe than historical episodes. The energy transition investments that were accelerated after 2022 are beginning to deliver capacity. Offshore wind expansion, grid modernization, heat pump adoption, these are moving at insufficient speed, but they are moving. Every unit of domestic renewable generation is a unit of insulation against the next fossil fuel price shock. And the Bank of England, whatever the constraints on its toolkit, retains credibility built over decades of independence. Credibility matters in an inflationary environment because it anchors expectations. If businesses and workers believe inflation will return to target, they moderate wage demands and price increases accordingly. That anchoring effect is doing real work, even when the interest rate tool is constrained. The downside. The structural vulnerabilities, energy dependency, productivity stagnation, Brexit adjustment costs, do not resolve quickly. They are the product of policy choices and structural shifts that accumulated over decades. They will take decades to reverse even with optimal policy responses that current political conditions make unlikely. The households most exposed, renters, low-income workers, those without savings buffers, are being asked to absorb a second major cost of living shock without the reserves to do so. The social consequences of sustained household financial stress, mental health, family stability, community cohesion, are real and lasting in ways that GDP figures do not capture. And the political paralysis that stagflation induces, no good options, every tool making something worse, creates a vacuum that populist movements of both left and right have historically filled. The 1970s stagflation didn't just produce economic pain, it produced a political realignment. The current episode may be doing the same thing more slowly and less visibly. Victor's verdict. Nobody in official Britain is using the word stagflation. The data this week suggests they should be. The UK is not in a crisis. It is in something more insidious. A slow erosion of economic resilience driven by the compounding of external shocks against structural vulnerabilities that were visible, known, and insufficiently addressed. The Iran war's energy impact is the trigger. The vulnerabilities it is pulling are not new. The honest conversation Britain needs to have about energy independence, about productivity, about the realistic costs of the policy choices of the last decade, is not being had in any serious political forum. Victor Smith will keep having it. Consequence score. Significant. I'm Victor Smith. That is the verdict.